Thanks, team. Today I'm going to be interviewing what I consider is he's just a straight up Kiwi bloke, all right? And it's someone who not only works here, but actually also invests so much of his time in just sitting and listening to people and investing even in our young people in the Fuel Youth Group. So can you guys please help me and give a big hand for Blair? Thanks, Blair. We're going to go up there. I'm just going to grab another mic here quick. Thank you. All right. We'll go to our booth here. Awesome, Blair. Thanks for, wow, it is high up here.
Yeah.
It is, awesome to interview you, Blair. And today, pretty much, we're doing interviews. Every week, we're going to have an interview up here. And basically, we just want to find out a bit more about who Blair is. So, Blair, I don't know where you want to start off today, but maybe you could just give us a, who are you?
All right. Is this a good place for my mic? Yeah, cool. Okay. So I'm pretty, I'd like to think that I'm pretty straight up and just run-of-the-mill. I was born Tauranga Hospital, lived at the Mount for ages, have recently moved up here. I'm going to give you the quick rundown. So father separated with mother when I was 2, so then I had a stepfather from about 2, so that's still pretty young. Big Māori guy. Probably wouldn't expect it, but it was like a different kind of, like I had a...
We've got a friend.
I had a big array of like kind of cultural, influences where I lived, which was at the mountain. That was probably the worst part of the mount, so, but it was a good place to grow up. And yeah, it was just us doing life.
Okay.
And it's got to me here. Now, is that what you want?
Yeah, that's
Cool.
good. Well, we love the end part because we love that you're here, Blair.
Yep. Same.
And
I actually love it here too.
And is that just because we're here or also because someone else is here? Both, right?
Both, but I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for someone else.
Okay, so we love you, Bree, that you're here, Blair. But so you grew up, now you're living in Auckland, but tell me a bit about your interests growing up, some of the things you've done. I've seen some crazy videos about Blair that I never thought was Blair. So maybe you could share with all of us about, you just growing up and some of the interests you were engaged in.
Okay, so I've always enjoyed, like sports growing up, and then Mum used to call me like a phase, like I'd be going through different phases, and it was more interest phases where I would, like I was into cricket and all of this kind of stuff, but then once I was able to actually like get a license or whatever, I was into motorbikes first of all. I was into hunting, so what else? Did I say forward driving? Hard out into forward driving, and then I'd sort of lose interest in that, and then it was fast cars, and I'd drift and do things I shouldn't do. Then I got into motorbikes again, different types of motorbikes, modifying them, and so I just basically have had a lot of different hobbies. I used to do wheelies. I don't think I wore my front tyre out at all, because I would pretty much ride everywhere on my back wheel.
And that's the video I saw on Facebook. It was Blair. Did you have a mullet?
Yeah, I've had...
Yeah?
Look, for a long time I've had long hair, but the reason why... I had a mullet for quite a few years, because I used to cut my own hair. And it's pretty hard to get the back.
All right.
So, yeah.
And yeah, that's the video I saw with you wheeling down the road on a motorbike.
Yeah.
And one of the things you didn't mention, but I know you're seriously passionate about, is surfing, right?
Yeah.
And where did that start?
Well, so living at the Mount, obviously, there's a beach right there. And I had never actually gone, everyone talks about the Coromandel and how beautiful it is. And I hadn't actually gone to the Coromandel ever up until a few years ago because there was no real need to, because the beach was there. So that was always, we used to drive down in the back of the ute to the beach and, get there. But my old man, my real dad, was into surfing, and he actually made surfboards for a brand, Bob Davies, which you might have heard of, or probably not. But yeah, he got quite into that and was quite good at it. And yeah, so he was into surfing. So yeah,
All right.
I enjoy it. I love it.
And one of the other things that you were telling me about your dad's boards is that you actually trying to collect a lot of them now.
Yeah. So he is now dead, but I have found probably 6 or 7 of them just on Trade Me, or a couple were in a surfing museum sort of thing. So I've purchased them, and yeah, so that's yeah. So I've got some of them, and you know they're his ones because the shapers always have their initials and stuff on the board. So I know that that was his kind of boards, and so I have a bit of an addiction with collecting old surfboards, vintage. So like from the early '60s, probably to the late '70s, and then I start to lose interest in that kind of style. But
And how many boards do you have, like, currently?
I had a bit of a cull, so I have 18 now.
Okay. Wow. So if you guys want to go surfing with Blair, yeah,
And
he's got enough boards.
Yeah, they're big boards too, because back in the '60s they were huge, and so a lot of them I don't actually surf. They're just for to have them.
Okay, cool. Blair, how about in the context of faith? Like, how do you end up today being engaged in a church? Like, where did your faith journey start? How do you get to know God?
Okay, so growing up with no Christian or any religious background, we used to go, so I went to Arataki Primary, which is the school that the area where I grew up, and they used to do this thing, religious instruction. I don't know if that was just unique to that school or whatever, but every Wednesday, I think it was primary school, and every Wednesday you'd go for an hour or something, and these Christian people would come along and sing songs and, I don't know, give you little leaflets about what happened when Jesus died or whatever. But my mum ended up not wanting us to go there, so we stopped going. And Mum has had a big influence in my life because she's always told me to be comfortable in your own skin and to question everything. She's never actually said to me, question everything, but by what she does, I have become a questioner. So she was like, why do these kids need to go to religious instruction? And so she pulled us out, not because she thought it was a bad idea, just because why do they have to go type thing. So that was my early Christian experience, but that didn't happen, that stopped pretty quickly. Do you want to hear more of it?
Yeah, go for it.
Then the same mother, a few years later, I saw some seminar on some Christian thing, and so she ended up going along to this with my sister, one of them. I got one older sister, one younger sister, and so they went along to this, and I thought, what the heck, Mum, what's this Christian Jesus freaky type thing? Yeah, but eventually I started to get interested. The reason I got interested in that was because I had then moved from the Mount to Tauranga, to a place called Maryvale. You may not know Maryvale, but that's one of the worst parts in Tauranga. And there was a lot of stuff that went down there. Like, we'd have police dogs coming through the yard, and I remember seeing like guys with big planks of wood, like attacking each other in the street, and then cops coming around and handbraking coming out, and it was like pretty full on. And we had drug houses around and whatever. And I saw this fight that happened outside my house, or it didn't actually eventuate, but I saw it brewing, and I actually felt that I had to shut the curtains because I felt so uncomfortable and kind of just like disillusioned with the world, I guess, that it was in such a negative thing.
Okay.
And that made me think there's got to be something better. Like, what is this heaven thing that Mum is investigating?
Okay. So that was quite a defining moment.
Yep.
In the context of just faith and thinking like, hey, maybe there is a God out there.
Yeah. And there's got to be somewhere better, or some better than what the world is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so then from there, your mom gives you, does she hand to you some wisdom that she's been learning about God and sharing that with you?
Yep. So I had moved up to Whangarei, and she was giving me these little booklets, Bible study things or whatever, just because I'd said I was interested. And the only reason I really liked them is because you could fill in the gaps. And it was quite easy and kind of fun. But I learnt a few things, and it was a head knowledge, but it eventually became kind of like a change, and I couldn't understand the change, but I felt impressed that maybe this was something I wanted to pursue, and I felt a change in me.
Wow. And from that, do you get connected in a church?
Yeah, but I did. The process was not just like. So there's been ups and downs through the years, faith strong, faith not.
Yeah.
When I started to get into church, it was like 17 years old, when a lot of people might be thinking this is the time that I would leave church. There's actually cooler things out there.
Yeah.
So it was an odd time to get into church probably, but it doesn't mean that I didn't, because I was going to church, it doesn't mean that I didn't do things I shouldn't have done. And so there was stuff, like it's been like that.
Up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what are some of your earliest church memories that you can remember, like a bit about the community, or has church changed from when you started to where you are now?
My the way I see a effective church being has changed, definitely. I thought it was very rules and like always worrying about, I've got to do this, or so yeah, it has, my thinking has changed, that God's still the same God that I met, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the way I see him showing himself, or me showing God, has definitely changed.
Has changed. Awesome. And if you would have to encourage all of us here today, in the context of we're in this series about knowing God, how would you say, for you, how do you personally get to know God?
So that also has changed. I thought it was initially, you read your Bible and all this stuff, and that is an important part of it, but it gets very cliched. Like, sometimes the more time you spend in a church, the more you hear people say, "Oh, read your Bible and pray." I'm not saying that doesn't work, but for a lot of people who are maybe initially learning or wanting to get to know God, that's it's not effective or whatever. So I reckon the best thing is to get involved with a church who is impacting the community in a positive way. You can have churches, you can have any groups in the community that are either doing good or really not being that effective. I think the best way is to get involved with a church that is effective and in your community and making a big difference and getting involved. So serving in that environment. Yeah.
Awesome. I think, Blair, just what you're sharing now is exactly who you are and the way you serve here at Gracegate. And for anyone who knows Blair, he's a solution guy. He sees a problem and he's trying to get it fixed and solved. And you'll go to great lengths to do that, often, sacrificing your own time. And we really value having you, and that you're a guy of helps. He's very similar, I think, to what Alan is as well, and we celebrated Alan last week, because he's just someone who gets things done, who comes and serves, and you have so much time for people, Blair. I always see you sitting and having conversations with, be it a young person or an old person, and that's echoing your faith in God. So can we just, give a big celebration for who Blair is?
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I do also get very tired of people. So I'm introverted, okay, but that doesn't mean that, so don't think I'm like fully just talking to everyone and, amazing. I'm a human being who isn't great at everything, and that's the thing about churches is don't come to church worrying about who you are in front of everyone else. Like when I went to this other church, when I first started going, okay, I lived in a caravan for about 9 months by a river, no power, no nothing. I used to swim in that river every day to shower. I used to go to work. I'd have to drive my four-wheel drive up this track. Sometimes I never could get my vehicle out, But so I had these muddy gumboots, and I would go to church, and everyone would get flashed up, and it looks nice and that's cool. But I would see people come who weren't maybe comfortable with what they were wearing, and I used to wear my gumboots, and I would greet people at the door in my muddy gumboots, because I thought that if they come up and they see someone who isn't is looking worse than what they are, and doesn't really care what they look like in the respect of being important, you can have pride in your appearance, but not to make them feel stink, then I lost my train of thought, but that's what I used to do anyway.
Yeah.
So that they would feel comfortable. And you come to church as you are, like Tobias, I don't know if it's an S or an ETH, whatever. You got bare feet and rock it, you are who you are. We're not cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Be you and feel comfortable in the church.
Awesome.
And find a church that you feel comfortable in.
Yeah. And I think, Blair, I can echo that, because also when I was growing up, my faith, we were often judged on, the way you came to church. But church is actually a space where you can come as you are, and feel accepted, feel welcome, grow in a place where you're loved. So we love you, Blair. Thanks for your time.
Cool.
Let's give Blair a hand.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Wes. And look, thanks to Blair too. I think we know Blair's normally a pretty reserved guy, right? So to talk about yourself from the heart like that, it's pretty special to share. Thank you. You did well. So part 2 of our Know God series, and for Maddie and Molly, Know God, that means know God, not know God, right? There was some confusion there. So part 2, and Wes introduced us last week talking about the unknown God, and why could that not be Jesus? And he said something there that actually surprised me a little bit. He said that over these next 4 weeks, over this series, we want everyone who's there, who's maybe on the fence or who's on the edge, looking in, who hasn't made a decision to follow Christ, to be a Christian, whatever it is. If you're there, then we want you to fully know Christ, to become a Jesus follower. And by that we mean to order your life, your time, your money, those decisions, everything around the teachings of Jesus. And when he said that, I was like, wow, because wow, I mean, yeah, that'd be great, right? And to be clear, that is exactly what we want. But isn't that just a bit unrealistic? Isn't that maybe a bit naive? Because if you're sitting here today and you haven't made that decision to be a Jesus follower, well, there's a really good reason why you haven't made that decision, right? Maybe more than one reason, and it's a good reason. And look, because I have a friend, right? And they know a lot about Christianity. They spend time around Christians. They know the Bible and all that stuff. But they've got a good reason. They're unsure about when it comes to this God thing. And their reason is, when they look at the world, when they look at the hurt, the pain, the suffering, the corruption, the innocence out there, they think, well, how do you gel that with the idea of an all-powerful, all-loving God, right? If God was real in that sense, then, he'd fix that, wouldn't he? Because how does that make sense? And that's a fair question to ask, isn't it? That's a real question. It's right to want an answer to that. Maybe for you that's not your reason. Maybe for you it's that you've seen and you've experienced other Christians in your life, And sometimes for Christians that walk doesn't quite match the talk, unfortunately, right? Sure, they talk about love and all that, but you know that probably you're better at that than them. And that's real, that's valid, right? It's unfortunate, that statement that, the problem with Christianity is Christians. There's a lot of truth in that, right? So you're right to ask that. That's a fair question for you, it's valid. Or maybe for you, your reason is around this whole, monopoly on truth thing that Christians do tend to do quite well, don't we? How is it that Christians can just have the truth? What about all those other religions out there? Are they all wrong? I mean, what about all those people who lived before Jesus came? Or who lived in a part of the world that never even experienced Christianity? How is it that they are automatically out and you Christians are automatically in? That doesn't make sense, right? That's not fair. I mean, that's a real question. That's a fair question to ask. It's valid, isn't it? I have another good friend. He's not here today. He lives down in the South Island now. And we have had many a discussion around, science versus Christianity, creation versus evolution. And his whole reason, his issue here is, Lindsay, you look, how can you, all those experts out there, those academics, those scientists, the vast majority of them don't support a Christian position. You just need to step outside of your little echo chamber for a while, get a real perspective, and you'll see things for what they really are. And so the science of it is a real obstacle for him. And that's fair, right? That's valid. It's a reasonable question for him to have and to want an answer to. And it'd be crazy for me to say to him, okay, cool, but hey, just try. Let's just, why not? Just because that'd be intellectually dishonest, wouldn't it? Isn't that a bit naive, a bit unrealistic? Maybe your reasons aren't intellectual, maybe they're more emotional. Like you've grown up in a family and you love this family, but this family, for maybe generations is of a different religion or is very anti-Christian. And sure, you may have an interest in this Jesus thing and knowing God, but if you go too far down that track, that's going to be a slap in the face to them, and it's going to hurt them, and you love them, and you don't want to do that. That's a real obstacle, isn't it? Or maybe for you, it's just that, you've got some good friends, and, they kind of think this religion stuff's a crutch for people, and you don't want to look dumb. You need those friends. You want those friends. So, that's a big obstacle, a real obstacle for you. Maybe it's not even intellectual. Maybe it's not even emotional. Maybe there's no real big issue for you. There's just no real big need either, right? Why do you need God? I mean, sure, you can come to Gracegate here. That's fantastic. You enjoy the community, and you're absolutely fine for other people to be Christians if they want. That's fine, but no big need for me. It's not a big deal. And so for Wes last week, or for me here now, to sit here and say, well, take that step, cross that line, given all the real questions the valid questions that you have, that's naive, right? That's a bit unrealistic. You can't ignore that stuff. I think that's fair. And the key thing I really want you to hear today is that, very few adults embrace Jesus or come to know God after they work through all those questions. So very few come to embrace Jesus after they work through the questions. Now, it does happen. It's rare. And I appreciated, Alan behind the camera there. He was up there last week and he talked about how he went through a Bible study process in answering his questions. And so it does happen. Although, to be fair, I know I was sitting there, I was skeptical in the audience, and I was thinking, maybe like you, sure thing, Alan, it was the Bible studies that had nothing at all to do with the lovely lady who was giving you those studies. Nothing there. It's just random that you ended up marrying that lady. I'm sure there was no attraction there for you at all in that. I mean, it does happen, but what is much, much more common is that adults, rational, sensible adults, become Jesus followers. Not because they overcome their questions, but because something happens to shrink those questions down. They don't go away at all. They just become smaller. And they bring them right with them into this Jesus journey. Something happens to shrink that list of obstacles. And sometimes that's a tragedy of some sort. The death of a loved one. Someone in their family's got a sickness, a real sickness. And suddenly that person who thought that miracles were essentially fairy tales, suddenly they're down on their knees, pouring out their heart to a God they weren't even sure existed before. Because now God's not this intellectual question. Suddenly he's personal for them. Suddenly it's just personal. And really quickly those questions like, how was the Bible written? What version should I be looking at? How did the ark work? How did the animals get on there? What happened to the dinosaurs at that time? What are my friends going to think? How did this world come to be here? How did I come to be here? Suddenly those really valid questions, they're still there, right? But they just shrink right down in light of a desperate personal need for God at that point. For some people that something is that they get to a point in their life that they say, I'm addicted. And that I know that I need a power outside of myself in order to work through that. For some people, that comes in nature, the awesomeness of God's nature. Some people work that way. For some people, they see it in other people around them. I mean, I don't know how that personal encounter happens for everyone. For some people, it's a fight brewing outside their house in Mirabel. However that encounter happens, it just shrinks down those obstacles. It does not get rid of them. It just makes them small. Because suddenly for that person, whatever it is, God moves from this intellectual category to personal for them. The list of obstacles, they are important, please. I do not want you to get the idea we're not saying those things aren't important. They absolutely are. You are absolutely right to want answers to very good questions there. And look, I'm happy to talk, and I know the team here at Gracegate would be happy to talk through any of those questions that you've got with you. All I'm suggesting here that is when it comes to that initial decision to know God, that those questions, they don't really help that much. Because knowing God is personal, it's relational. And those questions are good. You can bring them. They're just going to shrink down in size. Now, I'm sure that some of you out there sitting, some logical people like me, I'm sure I'd be here, they're not quite there yet, right? Sure, nice story, Lindsay. But if you really expect me to ignore all of those issues, those real questions I've got, about suffering, the world, all of those. If you expect me to ignore them because of some event, some emotional experience, well, that's crazy. I'm too smart for that. I couldn't deceive myself like that. And I guess I'd just like to suggest today that that actually happens in our lives way more often than we think, where we push aside important questions in one area because of how personal it is. You know, these decisions don't need to be big. It could be the fact that, you know, despite the fact that you've lived in New Zealand for a long time now and you could support the All Blacks and that would be okay. And yet, still you find yourself getting up at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, pulling on a Springboks jersey and getting your heart broken again, right? How does that make sense, right? That's small. But we actually do this with really big, life-important, life-changing decisions. We push aside reasonable, serious questions. We shrink them down because it gets personal. And if you're still not here, if you're still not there with me, then how about this? Guys, I would like to talk to you for a second here. And specifically married guys, right? I want you to think about all those reasons, you know, back when you were single, why it was a good idea not to get married, right? You had reasons, you know. Someone would come along and hint to you like, no, shouldn't it be time that you started thinking about getting married, you know? And you pull out your list, not for, you know, not literally, but in your head, you go through, there's this reason, right? There's that reason, I'm not ready. And it's not just married guys, because you single guys understand this completely, right? You've already got your list, or you're forming it, right? So that when, you know, Richie or Rosemary or probably Carissa sidle up to you and say, you know, I was young when I had a child at your age, you're like, you pull out this list, right? You pull out your list and you start working through the reasons. And I don't know about you, but, you know, your list might look like this, right? And these are real reasons, you know, valid reasons. And sorry, ladies, please. I should have said, remember Grace Gates are no perfect people zone, so no judgment here, right? But time or freedom, right? You know, that's a valid concern, right? Because I would really want to spend all my time each weeknight playing sport, and then I'd really love to go home and spend a weekend on the couch watching sport, right? That's reasonable. That's fair, right? And commitment, is that fair? Because I mean, I couldn't even commit to doing my laundry every 2 weeks. How am I going to commit to, you know? That's fair, right? Money, that's a big one. Let's be honest, you know, because I can't even afford everything I want, let alone what, you know, someone else might want. Other married people, you know, some we look at and we think, you know, well, why would I want that? That's a mess. Or it didn't work out. I don't know. I'd rather be single and lonely than married and miserable, right? That's a reason, right? Or maybe it's too young. You can only use that reason for a certain period of time. And this one, and please no judgment, but this is real for us. It's like, well, what if I met... We don't even have a name to put in that area, right? We don't even know someone there. It's just like, but what if it was amazing? And, you know, what if I gave the ring to her and then I should have given it to... I mean, that's real, right? They're real reasons, and we have them, and I know we have them because, sorry, Ben, love you, man, but because Ben, when he was 8 years old, in the car with Roslyn, announced that when I grow up, I'm not going to get married. And Ros said, okay, Ben, why? And he said, because I want to spend my own money and do what I want to do. Right? So, and you know, at 8 years old, that's quite astute. I don't know what that says about my parenting example. I mean, how many of you guys out there who are married worked through all your lists before you got married? How many of you went through and ticked these off? None of you, right? Zero, zilch. You didn't solve any of this stuff, did you? I mean, Alka's too scared to say, sure enough. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a guy out there. Maybe you know someone who went through this list, right, and ticked it off. Maybe, you know, in terms of time and freedom, they got a book, a couple of books probably, and they read them and they worked out that, you know, I'm making a choice to commit my time to pass up my freedom, so it's not really trapped. I'm still free to do that. So tick, right? Tick that one off. Or maybe commitment. You see, I'm not really sure how you work that one out before you get married. But maybe they do, and so tick. And maybe money, right? Maybe they decide to save, and save, and save, and save. And you know, when they're nearly 50, right, they're like, oh, maybe, I think I've got enough. We'll probably have to move to Invercargill, but I'll just have enough, so tick, right? And by then they're 50, so they can tick off that too young one. And they decide, right, I'm not going to associate with any married people who might be unhappy at all. We won't do that. And when I propose, I'm then going to put on some of those horse blinkers, right? So I never, you know, that's just not how it happens, is it? That's not rational. That's. I mean, how many of you guys worked through any of this at all before you got married? None of you, right? So why on earth would you get married? Why did you get married? It's pretty simple, right? Sorry. Sorry about that. That was, I was kidding. That was just my attempt to make sure you remembered today, and to make sure Wes didn't ask me to talk again. No, why did you get married? It's because you fell in love, right? And before marriage was this category with all these valid questions associated with it, right? Real questions. But now you're in love. No longer was marriage a category. It was a person. It was real. It was personal. It wasn't woman. It was that woman. It wasn't commitment. It was her. It wasn't anyone. It was that one sitting right over there. Marriage wasn't a category rule. It was a real person. It got personal real quick. And you got married despite this list. Because, well, you might meet someone else, there will never be someone else quite like Rosalind. The list doesn't go away. It just got small real quick because of the personal experience there of falling in love. And all I want to do today is suggest that that is exactly how intelligent, sensible, rational adults become Jesus followers. It gets personal for them. Their list doesn't get solved at all. They don't work through it. It just gets smaller, and they carry it with them right into a journey with Jesus, into a personal, intensely personal relationship with God. Now, ladies, now I do not pretend to understand this fully at all. I can only kind of guess a little bit. So again, no judgment, right? But seriously, I mean, if we were rationally, clearly thinking here, right? I mean, why would you ever want to have a baby? I mean, have you seriously thought that through? I mean, do you know how dangerous that is for you? Do you know how much pain is involved in that? I have no idea. I'm told, yeah, some people do, right? Do you know what that's gonna? I mean, what is that gonna do to your body? It's not gonna be the same again, right? I mean, do you know how much money is involved in that? How much kids cost? Supposedly, sorry, accountant coming in. Supposedly, like in Aussie, I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. It's like 400 grand to raise a kid to the age of 18. And that wasn't the scary part, because I read an article that said the most expensive part now is when they're 18 to 24, which I seriously hope is not true. Right? And that's not to mention time, which, let's face it, once you have kids is never your own again in any way like it was before. So logically, why would you do that? But that's not how it works at all, is it? You don't go through those things and go tick, yep, can cope with that one, tick, tick. It's just not how it works, because there's something inside of you, something that shrinks down that rational list completely until you hardly even consider it in light of an amazing child. Not a baby, but your baby. And look, I admit for some ladies, this is harder even still, because having a child is not easy for them. And logically, as harsh as it sounds, shouldn't there be more on their list? Because there's more time involved, a lot more money involved, a lot more risk to health involved. People spend thousands of dollars on fertility treatment. You know, I could sit with them and argue, or not argue, but point out quite, rationally and logically that the value of adoption in children, how there's so many children out there in need of just one loving, good parent. And all of that's valid and real, and none of it will matter, right? Because all of that will shrink down in light of the real personal need that they have for their baby, and rightly so, completely rightly so. See, my mate I talked about earlier, the guy with all the questions about science, right? So it was a couple of years ago, and a group of us guys got together. It may or may not have been a poker evening. And he came in and he announced that he and his wife were having their third child. And he was just glowing, smile completely across his face, right? And what you need to understand here is they had 2 kids already. Their youngest was about 6, so there was going to be quite a gap to this next child. They were living with his parents at the moment. They didn't have much money. And so, I'm not sure we were great friends, really, because he was glowing and we were like, really? Like, did you guys plan that? But he didn't care. He was on cloud 9, right? Because for him, it wasn't a logical exercise at all. It was personal. It was his child. And that, I just want to suggest that is how smart, rational, intelligent, sensible people become Jesus followers. It just gets personal for them, and I hope for him, that one day it'll get personal for him in that way. It's important to have your list. It's honest to have a list. I don't want you to ignore it at all, because these are real big questions for you. Just want to suggest that if you choose Jesus, to follow Jesus, that while the list doesn't go away, it just gets smaller. And sometimes to the point that those things are insignificant or not relevant anymore. See, this list now, for me, after 21 years of marriage, some of them may be a little bit relevant. I'd still like to watch sport all weekend, but that's okay. But it's not a concern over my money, it's our money, and we'll work that out. And this other married people thing, well, why does that matter? That's just not even relevant to us anymore. So when people ask you, when they ask me, how can you be so naive? Don't you know religion is a crutch? What about all the science? What about all those experts out there? You're a smart person. Why can't you see? See, they're still over here where marriage is a category, whereas you're over here because you've fallen in love with a Saviour, and it's personal. I'd just like to spend some time now to work through an example that we have of this in the Bible. And it's in the Gospel of John. And John was one of the original Jesus followers in that group that we call the disciples. And this is a story of how another one of that group, another one of those initial Jesus followers, how they came to make a decision to follow Jesus. So if we can just put that up on the screen then. All right. So John, and it's John chapter 1. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, the story's not not about Philip really. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael, that's who our story's about, found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom all the prophets also wrote." Now, this is a big deal. You know, the one he is talking about here, the one, is the Messiah. And this was someone that the Israelites had been looking for forever, for hundreds of years. That had been foretold in prophecy. They believed he was going to come along, he was going to chuck out the Romans, he was going to be a king that would put them back on time. So this was a huge, huge deal for them, right? Philip saying, "I've found the one." And if we just jump back a sec. And if Philip had stopped there, you know, maybe Nathanael wouldn't have protested so much. But he went on and he said, "The one is Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And that was a step too far, really, for Nathanael here. Nathanael was, and I can relate to this, he was a little bit skeptical, right? He wants to understand, and Blair talked about that. He wants to understand, and he wants to make sense of what Philip is saying to him here, because you know he was like, "Philip, man, you know that these scholars, all these Pharisees, these experts of the law, they've been looking for this Messiah forever. You know, how is it that you, Philip, are going to find this guy? That makes no sense at all." And then he says, next slide, please, Ben. He's like, "Nazareth. Can anything good come from there?" Nazareth. Now, I don't really understand what his big deal was with Nazareth. He obviously did not have a high opinion of Nazareth. Maybe if Philip had said from Jerusalem, Nathanael wouldn't have a problem. But, you know, I don't know whether it had a bad reputation where Nathanael didn't even know where it was or whatever, but this was a big deal. He's like, you know, this guy's huge. He's the one. He's from Nazareth. Are you crazy? Are you kidding me? And look, I think maybe this Nazareth thing, it's hard for us to grab the context of that today because that was way back then, right? So I'm going to try, and please don't shoot me, but forgive me. I'm going to try to bring that a little bit into maybe a better context for us today because, for us in New Zealand, what's the closest thing we have to a national religion, right? Rugby, thank you. And what's the pinnacle of rugby is the World Cup, right? And this guy here, Jordan's mate, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Richie, he's brought us 2 World Cup victories back to back, right? Fantastic. Now, this is the hard bit, and again, I need you to imagine, and please don't shoot me at all, I'm not trying to prophesy, and if there was wood around, I'd touch it and all that, but I'd like you to imagine that, let's just pretend that, next year we don't win the World Cup. It's pretty harsh, eh? And it's crazy because, but let's just imagine. And imagine like 4 years later we don't win it. Or even 4 years after that we don't. Or after that. Or after that. What is going on? What is going on? But or even after that. And I don't even know who's winning the World Cup in this time. It may be South Africa. Or it may be Japan because we know they beat South Africa. That doesn't matter. All I want you to imagine is that decades later, no World Cup. And you can imagine that Kenny by now is in huge despair. All he can talk about is 2015 and Richie. And he's sitting somewhere in the shade, maybe still at the Spark House, who knows. And I come along, probably on my Zimmer frame, and say to him, "Kenny, it's all right, mate. It's all good. It's fine because I've found the next Richie. We're saved. He's going to bring us back to the top. It's all good." His name's Fred. He's from Little Barrier. Right? And Kenny would be, and you can see this, he'd be like Lindsay, you are no expert in rugby. You think you are, but you are not. You're not a coach. You're not with the New Zealand Rugby Union. You know that they have people who are paid to go out and spot talent. If anyone's going to find the next Richie, it's not going to be you. It's going to be them. And Little Barrier, are you kidding me? I mean, is that even part of New Zealand? I mean, I've heard of Great Barrier, but, you know, there's not many people live there. Little Barrier must be smaller. I mean, do they even have enough people for a rugby team? I mean, it's an island, right? Do they even have a rugby field there? I mean, there's never even been an All Black from Great Barrier, and you're crazy, Lindsay. Come, let's go back to sleep here. You know, and Kenny would be completely right in those points, wouldn't he? Because they're valid, real, fair points. And that is all that Nathaniel is doing with Philip here. He's going, Philip, are you crazy? Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? You know, that's fair point, right? Now, Philip wasn't crazy. In fact, what Philip did next was actually quite smart, because he could have jumped in and argued this Nazareth point, right? He could have rationalized it out for his friend. He could have said, you know, Nazareth's okay. What do you have against Nazareth? I'm sure it's a perfectly good spot. I'm sure they've got a rugby field there. There was once a black firm from Great... I mean, I'm sure he could have done that, right? Because technically, it was possible for the Messiah to come from Nazareth, and someone had to find him, so why not Philip, right? So he could have, but he didn't. What did he do? Come and see, said Philip. No mention of Nazareth at all. Just, Nathaniel, come see for yourself. By all means, bring your list of questions about Nazareth along with you. Who knows? Maybe Jesus will answer them for you. But, you know, I just want you to come and see Jesus. And if we step outside the story for a second, I think for those of us who do profess to be Jesus followers, this is an important lesson, isn't it? That when people come to us with one of those big life issues, we can jump in and try and solve it. Or we could say, come, see, experience for yourself. What happens next? So Nathanael comes with Philip. And when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Or other versions say, "in whom there is nothing false." And I love this, because I think here Jesus is affirming that it's okay to have your list of questions, that it's okay to have doubts, that that's reasonable, that's okay. He's saying here in Nathanael is someone who won't be deceived, who will tell it like it is, who won't pretend at all, who won't be tricked. What happens next? "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. And Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still sitting under the fig tree before Philip called you." This question, how do you know me? I mean, I know I do. Do we all not struggle with that in some way? How God of the universe, how could you know little old me? I can't fathom that. So, how did Nathanael react to this? Then Nathanael said, "Let's talk about this Nazareth thing." No, he didn't. That's not right at all. It's not what he said. Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You're the King of Israel." There's no talk about Nazareth here. There's no, "How did you see me way over there? That was miles away." You know, that's a logical question, but Nathanael didn't ask that. He jumped straight and immediately to, "You are the Son of God." See, Nathanael's list didn't go away. His questions didn't disappear. Maybe he talked to Jesus about them later, I don't know. But those questions just got really, really small in the face of the person of Jesus, the Son of God. Before, the Messiah was a category over here, a mystery to be solved. And now it was personal. It was Jesus. He was there, and he knows me. And so this man in whom there was no deceit became one of the original followers of Jesus, along with his list. Just it got small because it came personal. And that still, today, is exactly how smart, rational, intelligent, sensible people become followers of Jesus. They have their list. It just gets personal. And I hope for you, over the next 4 weeks, whatever is on your list, go to the next slide. It may look like this. It may not. Whether those questions, those obstacles are intellectual, whether they're emotional, or whether, if we're honest, they're just a bit of a smokescreen, because sometimes it's easier to talk about how was the Bible written than to think about the impact that, following Jesus will have on my lifestyle, on my choices, on my decisions. So whatever it is, be it intellectual, be it emotional, be it a smokescreen, my hope over the next few weeks is that that list starts to shrink away in the face of a personal encounter with Jesus. See, later on from our story, those scholars, those Pharisees, they tried to trick Jesus, tried to trip him up with what they thought were tricky intellectual type questions. And they asked him, Jesus, what's the most important thing to God? Out of all these laws we've got, out of the 10 Commandments, out of the Torah, out of all of that, what's the most important thing to God? And what was Jesus' answer to that? They're asking God the answer. It's kind of cool. What was his answer to that? We should want to know that, right? Most important to God, his answer was, love the Lord your God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Love. And if I'm honest, for me right now, and maybe for you, this is really hard, because I think I'm a bit like Nathaniel, a bit skeptical at times. My tendency is to want to understand the Lord my God. And maybe if I can understand God, then I'll love him. But that's just not how it works for me, and it's not how it works for you, right? Understanding God. That Christians can't agree on common understanding of God, right? That's why we have all these different denominations everywhere. And if you've ever been part of a single denomination, you will know that even within that, they cannot agree on an understanding of God. They're good at arguing about that understanding of God. But understand God, that's not the starting point. Understanding. Loving the Lord your God, knowing God. That's all the initial invitation is for. And then in this weird kind of way, once you know God, once you're on that journey, that important list, and these are important questions, it just shrinks right down because it becomes personal. And all I want you to take from today is this: that your Heavenly Father, God, wants you to know Him more than you want to know the answers to your questions. He wants you to know Him more than He wants you to know the answer to your questions. It doesn't begin with answers to your questions. It begins when you invite God to make it personal. Let's just pray for a second. Father, thank you for your time here today with us. And Father, all we ask over the next while is that you help us to want to know you more than we want to know the answers to our questions. We've got important questions, God. But help us to want to know you more than we need the answer to those questions. Amen.